Hi everyone and welcome to Classic Gamer 74. I'm your host Anthony Ventrilo, and in today's episode we are going to discuss Starpath Games. Alright, a little background information on Starpath. In 1982 they created the SUPERCHARGER and it was available for $49.95. Now what this did was it expanded the RAM from 128 bytes to 6,272 bytes, which made for larger games and much better graphics. Alright, so here's how the SUPERCHARGER worked. The SUPERCHARGER was inserted into the cartridge slot of the 2600, and a cable connected into the earphone jack of a standard cassette player. All Starpath games were on audio cassette and were loaded by simply playing them in the cassette player while connected to the SUPERCHARGER. If any of you had the SUPERCHARGER back in the day or knew anyone who had it and got to play it, let me know in the comments section below, because I personally didn't know anyone who had it, nor did I have it myself. So anyway, now you always knew you were playing a SUPERCHARGER game because it would make this sound when you started it up. Starpath created 10 games that all have amazing graphics and really cool sounds, so let's check them out. The first game is Dragon Stomper, which most people consider the very first RPG game. Nowadays we consider RPG games to be the norm. Well, but in 1982, this was something completely new. Back then, adventure games were similar to games like Adventure and Venture. However, later on, you would have games such as Zork that were strictly text-based. But now, you would have a game that you have both the graphics and you have text, which would be later called RPG. And this was the very first one. Next up, we have Communist Mutants from Space. Yes, you heard that correctly. Those of us that were around in the 80s remember that the Cold War was still going on, so therefore, a title like this was no surprise. Alright, this is the game here, kind of a cross between Galaxian and Space Invaders. Pretty cool game that I really enjoy playing, and it's very addictive, much like Space Invaders or Galaxian. Next up, we have Escape from the Mind Master, which is probably one of the most well-known of all Starpath games and considered by some to be their signature game. This is what I call a first-person strategy game, not a first-person shooter, which would come out in the next couple decades. But in this one, you're trapped in a maze of sorts, and you're trying to find different parts, like that, for instance. You're looking for different shapes to put in these specific shape holes in order to escape from this maze and get into another one. Really a lot of fun and a challenging game. Next up, we have Fireball. What this reminds me a lot of is Super Breakout, except for instead of trying to get through a horizontal trap, I guess you would call it for lack of a better term, you're trying to bust your way through these little ring things, and they have their own little balls inside that help to break through them. Your typical paddle game, I would consider it, kind of a fun one. Although I'm not really big into paddle games, I have to say that this one was actually a lot of fun. Next up, we have the official Frogger by Sega. This has to be probably one of the most well-known of all video games. It was ported out to just about every game system known to man, and of course I will be doing an episode on it later on, but let's look at Starpath's version of the game. Of course, many of you know the concept. You're a frog trying to fill up the lily pads on the other side. You have to go through traffic, you have to jump on turtles and logs, watch out for alligators, and yeah, you know the story. The only main difference I've seen between this version and, say, the Atari 2600 version by Parker Brothers is the graphics are a little bit different, and you have the songs playing pretty much throughout the game. Okay, next up we have Killer Satellites. Alright, you were piloting this spaceship or airplane kind of thing, and you were trying to protect your neighborhood from these aliens that come out of the sky. Really a fun game, kind of reminds me a lot of Defender. Next up, we have Labyrinth. If this game looks familiar to you, it should, because it's actually the prototype for what would later become Escape from the Mind Master. Although the game is actually operative, you can kind of see how some changes were made in order to create the game that was eventually released. And next up we have Party Mix. Here's a quick preview of the 5 games that are on this cassette. Next up we have Phaser Patrol. Now if this game seems a little familiar, it should, because it is almost a carbon copy of Star Master. They came out right around the same time, so it's kind of hard to say who was first and who was second, but you know, they're both kind of they're both a lot of fun. The graphics, of course, in this one are a little more hyped up than they were on Star Master, and you're not really shooting lasers, you're kind of just shooting missiles on this version. But yeah, this is a really fun game, as I really enjoy first-person space shooters a lot, so I had a blast, pun intended, playing this game. Next up, we have Rabbit Transit. Now, somewhere, somehow, a prototype of this game was found that was intended strictly for the Atari 2600 in cartridge form, not in Starpath form. Why that was, I really don't have a clue. But anyway, this is the original Starpath version of the game. Now in this, you take on the role of this rabbit, and the first part you were trying to get to your friend the turtle. Now this one is kind of similar to Cubert. You're going around trying to light up these platforms without getting caught, and then you bring your family out. Now every time you complete these levels, your family gets larger and larger. And of course, getting to them becomes more and more difficult. Honestly, I have to say this is one of my favorite of the Starpath games. And there's a snake, see? I really consider this game a lot of fun, and this would definitely be almost like a family type game. I would think that, you know, the whole family would enjoy playing. I certainly did. And next we have Suicide Mission, a title that I really don't think would be allowed to be used today, but anyway. Alright, in this game you have been shrunken down to microscopic size, and you are going into someone's body and their bloodstream, and you are trying to destroy these germs and viruses. It's not as easy as it sounds, because some of these, when you shoot them, they multiply. Not an original concept, but, you know, still quite creative if you ask me, and it's a really fun game. Next up is Survival Island. Alright, the story behind this game is you are a survivor of a shipwreck. You have a few supplies and a raft, and you are trying to make it to this desert island off in the distance. Of course, if you could just go right to the island, it wouldn't be much of a game, now would it? So you have to keep an eye out for sharks and other strange sea creatures, and you know, try to get to the island, which I have never done. I have never got past this first level. If any of you have played this game and have made it, you know, to the island, let me know in the comments section below, because I would really like to know how you did it. Like I said, I really consider this a fun game and a challenging game, and I know with some practice I will eventually be able to make it to the island. What also sets this game apart from other Atari games at this time is you actually are able to put in codes once you get so far, so that you can start where you left off, you know, like a save game. This was probably the first game as far as like an Atari game to have it. Of course, these became something we take for granted nowadays, but you know, this was a new concept back then. And our final game for today, Sword of Saros. Alright, in this game, the object is to find your way out of the dungeon of the evil wizard as you discover pieces of the magical Sword of Saros. So what you're doing this one is just trying to get as much treasure as possible, and you're trying to just find your way out of there. Now, there are 9 rooms in each area in which you are trying to find these treasures. Unlike some adventure games, however, you are not able to fight back. You're just supposed to collect your stuff and get out of there. I don't really care for this that much. I think if you had been able to fight back, the game would have probably been a lot more fun. However, just grabbing stuff and running like a coward, I kind of thought that was a little on the weak side, but you know. Anyway, a very early adventure game, and you know, obviously some people like the game. Me personally, I didn't care for it that much. Well, that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. If you had the Supercharger in any of these games, or if you have a suggestion of a game that you would like to see reviewed on this channel, let me know in the comments section below, as who knows, it may become the subject of a later episode, and I'd really like to hear from people that actually played these games back in the day. Well, this has been Anthony Ventrilo, and I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will see each and every one of you in the next one. Until then, have a great day. Goodbye.